The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and all that time, no species had ever refused their demands. They were ancient beyond measure and powerful beyond imagination, and they had built their empire on a simple truth that every species eventually learned. Resistance was pointless, and submission was the only path to survival. The council was made up of 7 elder races who had conquered, or absorbed, every civilization they had ever encountered. The Cathari were insectoid beings with gleaming black shells and compound eyes that could see in spectrums no human could imagine, and they served as the diplomats and administrators of the council. The Vorn were crystalline creatures who communicated through harmonic vibrations, and their ships were works of art that could reduce a planet to ash. The Deep Swarm lived in the crushing depths of water worlds, and they commanded the largest fleet in the galaxy. 4 other ancient species completed the council, and together they controlled more than 1,000,000 star systems. They had forgotten what it meant to be challenged, because no one had challenged them in 6,000 years when the human vessel Meridian dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of council space. It was detected immediately by a Cathari patrol station. The Meridian was small by galactic standards, and it carried a crew of 47 humans who had no idea what they were about to encounter. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge and watched as her communications officer tried to make sense of the alien transmissions flooding their systems. "Captain," Lieutenant Park said with confusion in his voice, "they are hailing us in our own language." Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine, because that meant these aliens had been watching humanity long enough to learn English. "Put them through," she ordered. The view screen flickered and then displayed a face that would haunt human nightmares for generations. Ambassador Vethka was a Cathari diplomat who had pronounced judgment on more than 100 species during his long career, and his mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement as he studied the tiny human ship. "You are far from your territory, small ones," Vethka said, and his voice was surprisingly smooth for a creature that looked like a giant praying mantis. Vasquez straightened her shoulders and replied, "We are explorers from Earth, and we come in peace." "Peace," Vethka repeated, and his compound eyes glittered. "Yes, you will have peace if you are wise enough to accept our terms." He explained that the Galactic Council had observed humanity for the past 300 years, and they had decided it was time to bring these newcomers into the fold. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Humanity would be classified as a Tier 7 species, which was the lowest tier in the Council hierarchy. All human colonies beyond Earth would be surrendered to Council control. Human populations would be subject to Council-approved limits. Humans would provide labor for Council mining operations on designated worlds. In exchange for these concessions, humanity would be permitted to continue existing. Vethka delivered these terms as if he were offering a gift, and in his mind, he probably was, because many species had been simply exterminated rather than integrated. "You have 1 solar cycle to deliver your answer," Vethka concluded. "Use this time wisely, Captain, and counsel your leaders to accept what cannot be changed." "And if we refuse?" Vasquez asked, and her voice did not waver, even though her heart was pounding. Vethka's mandibles clicked again, and this time there was no mistaking the cruel amusement in the sound. "No species refuses," he said. "In 12,000 years, not one species has ever refused the Council's generous offer of integration." He paused, and his eyes seemed to bore into Vasquez's soul. "Those who resisted before the offer was made were eliminated, Captain. And their worlds are now mining colonies or nature preserves where Council citizens vacation. We number in the billions," Vasquez said. "Earth alone has 10 billion people. The veterinary numbered in the trillions." Vethka replied, "They resisted for 7 years, before the last of them died on a world that is now a pleasant resort destination. And I am told the beaches are lovely." The transmission ended and the bridge of the Meridian was silent. Lieutenant Park looked at his captain with fear in his eyes and asked, "What do we do?" Vasquez stared at the empty view screen for a long moment. And then she turned to face her crew. These were the first humans to make contact with an alien civilization, and that civilization had just demanded their species surrender or die. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," she said, and her voice was steady. "Every government and every leader needs to hear this recording, and they need to hear it now." "Captain," her first officer, Commander Rodriguez, said quietly, "what will you recommend?" Vasquez thought about her daughter back on Earth, who was 7 years old and learning to ride a bicycle, and she thought about her parents who had fled political persecution to give their family a better life. She thought about every human who had ever refused to kneel. "Before a tyrant, I will recommend," she said slowly, "that we tell them exactly who they are dealing with." Rodriguez nodded, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "And who is that, Captain?" Vasquez smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Humans," she said. "We are humans. And we do not kneel." The message was sent, and across the vast distance of space, the leaders of Earth began to gather and debate and argue about what to do. They had one solar cycle to decide the fate of their entire species. Some would counsel surrender and some would demand resistance. But none of them yet understood what was truly at stake. Because this was not just about survival. This was about whether humanity would live on its feet or die on its knees. And that was a question that would be answered not by politicians or diplomats, but by ordinary people who had to decide what kind of future they wanted for their children. The clock was ticking, and the galaxy was watching, and somewhere in the vast halls of the council, Ambassador Vethka was already drafting the paperwork for humanity's integration, because he had never once doubted what their answer would be. He had no idea how wrong he was. Earth had never truly been united in all of human history. Nations had fought wars and signed treaties and built alliances that crumbled within generations. Religions had divided people, and ideologies had turned neighbors into enemies. But when the Council's ultimatum was broadcast on every screen and every speaker on the planet, something changed in the hearts of 10 billion human beings. The recording from the Meridian played on loop, and people watched the alien ambassador deliver his demands with growing horror and growing rage. In New York, the United Nations convened an emergency session, and delegations from every nation on Earth crowded into the General Assembly Hall. The debates began immediately, and they were fierce. The representative from one powerful nation stood and declared that compliance was the only rational choice. "We have 47 ships," he said with frustration in his voice. "They have millions, and the mathematics here is simple. And survival must come before pride." Another delegate rose to argue that humanity could buy time through submission and work secretly to build strength. Over generations, our grandchildren or their grandchildren might be able to resist, she said. But we cannot win today, and we must be realistic. Philosophers were brought in to make elegant arguments about pragmatism and the long view of history. Military experts presented calculations showing that humanity would be completely destroyed within weeks if they chose to fight. Religious leaders spoke of humility and acceptance and the wisdom of bending before a storm. For hours the debate raged, and the world watched on screens in homes and offices and public squares. And then something unexpected happened. A woman walked past security in the chaos and confusion and somehow made her way to the speaker's podium. Her name was Priya Sharma, and she was a dock worker from Mumbai with calloused hands and tired eyes and no credentials that would normally allow her anywhere near this hall. Security moved to stop her, but something in her face made them hesitate. "Let her speak," the Secretary General said quietly, and no one could say why he made that decision. Priya Sharma stood before the most powerful leaders on Earth, and she did not look afraid. "My grandmother survived partition," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the silent chamber. When the borders were drawn and millions were displaced, she walked for weeks, with nothing but the clothes on her back. My great-grandfather survived the famines when the powerful decided that some people were worth feeding and others were not. Every generation of my family has been told to kneel, to accept, to be grateful for scraps from someone else's table. She looked around the room at presidents and prime ministers and kings, and every generation of my family has found a way to stand back up. A murmur ran through the assembly, but Priya was not finished. They have bigger ships, she said. They have technology we cannot match, and they have numbers that make our entire species look like a rounding error. But they have never fought someone who would rather burn than bow, and they have forgotten what that looks like. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but it reached every corner of the hall. I am not voting for my survival, she said. I am voting for my children's dignity. I would rather my daughter grow up in a universe where humans stood and fell than in one where we crawled and survived. I would rather she inherit ashes and pride than chains and shame. She looked directly at the cameras that were broadcasting her words to every corner of Earth. I vote no, she said, and I will keep voting no until my last breath. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then the delegate from a small island nation stood up. I also vote no, she said. Another delegate stood, and another, within an hour. The General Assembly had done something unprecedented in human history. They voted unanimously. Every single nation on Earth chose defiance over submission. The response to the council was drafted by a committee, but the final version was edited by Priya Sharma herself. It was 7 words long. We decline your generous offer, and we say to you, come and take it. When Ambassador Vethka received the transmission, he read it 3 times because he could not believe what he was seeing. In 12,000 years, no species had ever refused. He contacted the council immediately, and his report caused something that had not happened in millennia. The 7 elder races disagreed about what to do. Some wanted immediate annihilation. Others argued for a more measured response, but all of them felt something they had not felt in a very long time: uncertainty. Meanwhile, on Earth, the celebrations were brief because everyone knew what was coming. Military factories that had been dormant for decades roared back to life. Scientists who had been working on theoretical projects were suddenly given unlimited resources. Young people lined up at recruitment centers in numbers that overwhelmed the systems designed to process them. And in homes across the planet, families gathered together and talked about what they were willing to die for. Priya Sharma went back to her job at the Mumbai docks, but she found that her co-workers looked at her differently now. You spoke for all of us, an old man told her with tears in his eyes. She shook her head and replied, I only said what everyone was already thinking. But that was not entirely true. She had given voice to something that humans had carried in their hearts since the first of them had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. A refusal to be small, a determination to matter, a defiance that burned brighter than any fear. The council had expected submission because that was all they had ever known. They were about to learn that humans were something new, something that would not kneel, something that would change the galaxy forever. The countdown to war had begun. The council did not send their full fleet because that would have been wasteful and unnecessary. Admiral Kethfern commanded a pacification squadron of 300 warships, and he considered this assignment to be beneath his dignity. He had crushed rebellions from species far older and more advanced than these upstart primates. He expected to be home within a week. The human fleet gathered at Proxima Centauri, which was humanity's first and largest colony outside the solar system. 47 ships faced 300, and the mathematics could not have been clearer. Captain Elena Vasquez had been promoted to admiral in the weeks since first contact, and she now commanded the entire human defense force from the bridge of the newly commissioned battleship Defiance. She looked at the tactical display and saw the Council fleet approaching in perfect formation. Their ships were beautiful in a terrible way, with sleek lines and weapons that glowed with barely contained power. Each council vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Admiral, her tactical officer, reported. "They are hailing us." Put them through. Admiral Cathvarn appeared on screen, and his insectoid face showed what might have been contempt. "You have one final opportunity to surrender," he said. "Lay down your weapons and your deaths will be quick. But if you force us to destroy you piece by piece, then I cannot promise mercy for your civilians." Vasquez smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had already made peace with death. "Admiral," she said, "I have a message from the people of Earth." "Deliver it." "They asked me to tell you that we would rather die free than live as slaves. And they asked me to tell you one more thing." "What is that?" "Come and take it." She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "All ships," she said into the fleet-wide channel, "you know what we are fighting for, and you know what we have to do. And I am proud to serve alongside every single one of you. Defiance, Unconquered, and Liberty's Price, you are cleared for Operation Thermopylae, and may whatever gods you believe in guide you home." 3 ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Council fleet. The Council vessels did not react at first, because what these human ships were doing made no tactical sense. They were not firing weapons. They were not launching missiles. They were simply accelerating directly at the flagship. Admiral Cathvarn watched the tactical display with confusion. "What are they doing?" he asked his officers. No one answered because no one could understand. And then one of his officers said in a voice filled with disbelief, "Admiral, they are not slowing down. They will destroy themselves," Cathvarn said. "Yes, Admiral, I believe. That is their intention." The 3 human ships hit the Council flagship at maximum velocity. The Defiance struck the command section. The Unconquered hit the engine core. The Liberty's Price drove itself into the weapons array. The explosions were visible across the entire star system. Council shields were designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles and missiles. They were not designed to stop ships that had deliberately turned themselves into kinetic weapons. Admiral Cathvarn died without understanding what had happened. The flagship broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions, and 2 nearby vessels were caught in the blast. And then the rest of the human fleet attacked. They launched everything they had at once in a storm of missiles and drones and improvised weapons. Mining charges that had been designed to crack asteroids were fired at Council ships. Fuel pods rigged to detonate on impact streaked through space. Escape vessels packed with explosives and piloted by volunteers who knew they would never return dove into the gaps in the Council formation. It was chaos and madness, and it was nothing like any battle the Council had ever fought. Council ships began to die. One vessel was destroyed when a human frigate rammed its engine section. Another was crippled by a swarm of mining drones that attached themselves to the hull and detonated simultaneously. A third was taken out by a human pilot who flew his damaged fighter directly into the bridge. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, humanity had lost 31 ships, including every crew member who had volunteered for the ramming runs. The Council had lost 63 vessels. By any reasonable measure, it was a defeat for humanity, because they had lost more than half their fleet, while the Council still had more than 200 ships in the system. But the Council had never lost 63 ships to a single species. Not ever. Not in 12,000 years of galactic dominance. The surviving Council commander of one named Crystal Voice of Morning ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup and assess the situation. As the Council fleet pulled back, the surviving human ships broadcast a message on all frequencies. "We are still here," Admiral Vasquez said, and her voice was hoarse with exhaustion and grief. "We have buried our dead, and we are still here. And we will be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. You can kill us, but you cannot break us. Come back whenever you are ready, and we will show you what humans are made of." The message was recorded by Council ships and transmitted back to their command. It was also recorded by something else. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a deep swarm monitoring station picked up the transmission, and the technician who heard it felt something he had not felt in 8,000 years. Hope. He made a copy of the recording, and he sent it to everyone he knew. Within days, the footage of the Battle of Proxima was spreading across the galaxy, and the Council had no idea what they had just unleashed. The battle footage spread across the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. No one knew exactly how it escaped Council censorship, but within weeks, every species in Council space had seen the recording of tiny human vessels hurling themselves at warships 100 times their size. On the water world of Deep Swarm Prime, the footage was shown in secret gatherings in the crushing depths, where Council monitors could not reach. The Deep Swarm had been conquered 8,000 years ago, and in all that time they had never forgotten what freedom tasted like. Elders who remembered stories passed down from their grandparents watched humans die rather than surrender, and they wept. A new word began to spread through Deep Swarm society. Vaskra. It meant those who do not yield, and it was the highest compliment their language could offer children who had never known anything but Council rule. Began to whisper the word to each other like a prayer on the crystal worlds of the Vorn. The footage created vibrations that spread from settlement to settlement. The Vorn communicated through harmonic frequencies, and they composed a new frequency specifically for humans. Translated into words, it meant something like, they fight as if they have already lost everything, and they fight as if death is not an ending but a beginning. Vorn philosophers debated what it meant that these short-lived creatures would sacrifice themselves so willingly. Some said it was madness, but others said it was something else entirely, something the galaxy had forgotten on 100 conquered world species that had submitted to Council rule generations ago began to remember old stories, stories of ancestors who had resisted before. They were broken stories of heroes who had chosen death over chains. The humans had proven something that the Council had spent 12,000 years trying to make everyone forget. The Council could be hurt, they could bleed, they could lose in. The great halls of the Kethari homeworld, the High Command, gathered to discuss what had happened at Proxima. This cannot stand, General Vethkarn declared, and his mandibles clicked with fury. We must send the full fleet and eliminate these creatures before their madness spreads. And how many ships will we lose? Asked another general, whose voice was quieter and more thoughtful. How many of our warriors will die fighting an enemy that considers death a victory? It does not matter how many we lose, because we will win in the end. Will we? The quiet general replied. The Vethnari resisted for 7 years, and it cost us 11,000 ships to destroy them. And these humans fight even harder than the Vethnari ever did. The debate raged for days. Some Council members wanted immediate total war, while others counseled caution, and still others suggested that perhaps a negotiated settlement might be possible. For the first time in millennia, the Council was divided, and while they argued, the humans were not idle. On Earth, the funerals for the fallen were broadcast on every screen in every nation. Each name was read aloud. Each face was shown. Each story was told. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun had been a mother of 2 who had volunteered to pilot the Liberty's Price into the Council flagship. Her children sat in the front row at her memorial, and they did not cry. My mom told me that some things are worth dying for, her 8-year-old son said when asked to speak. She said that freedom is one of those things, and I am going to make her proud. Captain Marcus Webb had been 73 years old and had come out of retirement to command the Unconquered. His last message to his grandchildren had been simple. Do not mourn me because I am doing exactly what I was born to do. Ensign Yuki Tanaka had been 22 years old and had only been out of the academy for 6 months when she volunteered. For the ramming mission, her parents released her final letter, which ended with the words, I am not afraid, because fear is for people who have something to lose. And I am giving everything I have so that you will have something to gain. The memorials went on for weeks, and when they were finally over, a simple message appeared on screens across the planet. They died standing, and so will we. Recruitment for the newly formed United Earth Defense Force exceeded all projections. Factories that had never built weapons were converted overnight. Scientists worked without sleep to develop new technologies that might give humanity an edge, and across the planet, ordinary people did extraordinary things. A retired engineer in Germany designed a new type of missile guidance system in her garage. A teenager in Brazil figured out a way to make human ships harder to detect on council sensors. A group of miners in Australia developed a technique for creating explosive charges that could punch through council shields. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible odds. This was the ultimate test on the council homeworld ambassador. Vethka watched the human memorial broadcasts with growing unease. He had dealt with many species over his long career, and he had seen every possible reaction to council dominance. He had seen fear and submission and desperate bargaining. He had seen brief resistance that crumbled as soon as the cost became clear. He had never seen this. These humans were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because losing while standing meant more to them than winning on their knees. He requested reassignment to a different sector, and his request was granted. Before he left, he composed a personal message to the council leadership. I have studied these humans extensively, he wrote, and I have reached a conclusion that troubles me deeply. They are not like any species we have ever encountered. They do not fear death. They welcome it if it serves their cause. And I do not know how to defeat an enemy who considers dying a form of victory. The message was filed and forgotten in the chaos of war preparations. But Ambassador Vethka had seen something that the council leadership had missed. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was beginning to remember what it meant to hope. High Counselor Maranthax was the eldest of the Kethari queens, and she had not left her homeworld in 300 years. She had watched empires rise and fall, and she had guided the council through crises that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. Now she traveled across the galaxy to meet with a species that had existed for less time than she had been alive. The meeting took place on a neutral station at the edge of council. Space Elena Vasquez represented humanity, and she wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. Maranthax studied the human woman as she entered the chamber. Vasquez was small and fragile, with a lifespan that was barely worth measuring, and yet she walked as if she owned the room. You cannot win, Maranthax said, and her voice carried the weight of millennia. Surely you must understand this by now, because we could sterilize your worlds, and we could end your species in a single cycle. Vasquez nodded calmly. You could, she agreed. Then why? The ancient queen asked, and the question seemed to genuinely confuse her. Why throw yourselves into the void, and why choose extinction over submission? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Because submission is not survival, she said finally. Submission is just dying slowly, and if we have to die, we would rather do it in a way that means something. She leaned forward, and her eyes met the queen's compound gaze without flinching. You have ruled for 12,000 years because everyone believed resistance was futile. And we just proved it is not. And even if you destroy us tomorrow, that knowledge is out there now. Every conquered species in every subjugated world has seen our ships ram yours. And they have seen your fleet retreat. And they know now that the council can bleed. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. That knowledge is something you can never take back. Maranthax considered this for a long moment. She had expected many things from this meeting, but she had not expected wisdom. What do you want? She asked. Recognition as an independent species, Vasquez replied. Full sovereignty over our territory, and a seat at the council table. Not tier 7, and not any tier. Equal standing. Impossible. The Queen said immediately. The Council would never agree to such terms. The Council will agree. Vasquez interrupted. Because the alternative is fighting a species that turns every defeat into a recruitment poster. She stood and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. You can destroy us, she said, but you will lose ships in every battle. And you will lose soldiers, and every loss will inspire 1,000 rebellions in species you thought you had broken centuries ago. The Deepsworn are already teaching their children new words. The Vorn are composing songs about human courage. Your empire is held together by the belief that resistance is pointless. And we have proven that belief is a lie. She turned back to face the Queen. We are not offering you victory or defeat. And we are not offering you war or peace. We are offering you a choice. Keep your empire intact with humans as allies. Or watch it crumble while you waste resources trying to kill us. The negotiations lasted 3 months. There were setbacks and threats and moments when war seemed inevitable. The Council hardliners demanded annihilation while the pragmatists argued for accommodation. Intelligence reports showed unrest spreading through conquered species at a rate that alarmed even the most optimistic. Council analysts and through it all humanity continued to prepare for war while hoping for peace in the end. The Council accepted humanity's terms, not because they had lost, not because they fear humans more than any other species, because they finally understood something that had never occurred to them before. Some beings measured victory differently. Against an enemy who considered death preferable to surrender, even the greatest empire in the galaxy had to learn a new kind of calculation. The treaty was signed on the anniversary of the Battle of Proxima. Humanity became the first species in 12,000 years to join the Council as equals rather than subjects. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood beside High Councilor Marinthax for the official ceremony. You are a remarkable species, the Queen said quietly as the documents were exchanged. We are stubborn, Vasquez replied. It is both our greatest strength and our most annoying quality. Something like amusement flickered in the Queen's ancient eyes. I suspect the Council will learn this soon enough. 50 years later, a statue stood in the central plaza of New Geneva, which had become the capital of the United Earth Federation. It depicted 3 ships frozen in the moment before impact. The Defiance, the Unconquered, and the Liberty's price beneath it a plaque read, "They asked us to kneel, and we taught them that some species stand." Ambassador Chun Wei paused before the statue on her way to the spaceport. She was humanity's 3rd representative to the Galactic Council, and today she would cast a vote on an important matter. A new species had been discovered on a world at the edge of the galaxy. They were small and furred and gentle, and they had just encountered their first Cathari survey vessel. The proposed terms for their integration were Tier 7 classification. The lowest tier, labor and submission and survival on someone else's terms. Chun Wei looked at the statue, and she thought about everyone who had died so that she could stand here today. She thought about Priya Sharma, who had spoken for humanity when it mattered most. She thought about Elena Vasquez, who had turned defeat into victory through sheer determination. She thought about all the volunteers who had given their lives so that their children could live free. Then she smiled and walked toward the spaceport. She had a vote to cast, and she already knew what that vote would be. The galaxy had learned the meaning of defiance 50 years ago. Now it was time to teach that lesson again, because humans did not kneel, and they would not let anyone else kneel either. Not if they had anything to say about it. The end.